Evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the annual Siddiqui Lecture in Islamic Studies. And I am so thrilled to introduce our speaker, Sarah Tilley, who is Associate Professor of Arabic Literature at the University of Florida. Her main research areas are animals and environmental ethics in Islam, Quranic stylistics, and tradition and modernity in Arabic literature. Her publications include Animals in the Quran, All Animals Are Equal or Are They? And From Breath to Soul, the Quranic word Ruh and its misinterpretations. Tonight, we are excited because she will be sharing with us research that is being built towards her next book project. And without further ado, I would love to welcome Professor Tilley.
Thank you very much. Thank you. First, I would like to say a big thank you to Helene, Manuela, the Siddiqui, the Taysir Institution and the Siddiqui Endowment. Thank you very much for having me here and giving me the opportunity to share my ideas with you today. I'm very excited about animal themes and environmental themes. And let me start by providing my kind of overall position. What I try to do in my work in general is to propose fresh readings of Islamic sources, especially the two scriptures of Islamic traditions, and these are the Quran and the Hadith. Traditionally, like Muslims and non-Muslim scholars have read both scriptures with approaching them, with preconceived ideas about humans' special status. The idea is that human beings are privileged in the Quranic worldview and in the Hadith worldview and the prophetic tradition. I believe that a close reading of both texts shows the opposite, in fact, and it has very interesting views about, the special status of non-human animals and the non-human world in general, right? It actually values it, in my view, it values it a lot more than it does human beings. So this is my main thesis. What I'm trying to do today is to look at the role of non-human animals in the early history of Islam. I'm going to discuss themes that are probably known to most Muslims. These roles, like Muslims know about them. Some of them are mentioned even in the Quran, and even the Hadith narratives are known to most people. But I think that in most cases we just read them on the surface. We do not analyze them deeply enough to appreciate their significance and what they seem to be telling us about the non-human world. So let me start. I will be reading this, and I will perhaps stop every now and then to provide some clarifications, just in case, some of us are not very familiar with Islamic texts, Islamic notions, and Islamic tradition in general. All right, so years into Muhammad's prophetic career, the leaders of his tribe, the Quraysh, which is a very influential tribe, decided to impose an embargo on his clan to pressure them to withdraw their protection from him. The Prophet's biographer, Ibn Ishaq, states that the terms of the embargo were recorded on a deed. In Arabic, this word is a sahifa, which was hung on Mecca's holy shrine, the Kaaba. I'm sure many of us, or most of us, probably know can bring up the image of the Kaaba. So they hung this document on the Kaaba. The terms stipulated that no intermarriage and no commercial transactions between Muhammad and other Quraysh clans should occur. The ban continued for 2 or 3 years until, Ibn Ishaq tells us, Muhammad and those with him were exhausted, nothing reaching them except what came from their friends and known to the Quraysh tribe. However, a little bit later, some of the boycotters, like they had a change of heart. They were revolted by the misery imposed on their kin, and they thought that the embargo imposed on Muhammad and, like other Muslims, the early Muslim community, was inconsistent with their tribal ethos. So this group started coalescing against it. In the meantime, Ibn Ishaq continues, God sent against the deed a termite. In Arabic, this is called arada, who ate all the parts on which God's name were written, leaving only words about oppression, rupture, and falsehood. These are Ibn Ishaq's words. So what happens after that? God informs Muhammad that this is, that this insect has eaten most of the document. And Muhammad's uncle approaches the notables of the Quraysh tribe to propose a deal to them. So what are the terms of the deal? If the document proves to be different from what Muhammad has claimed, then he should withdraw his protection and allow them to do whatever they wished with Muhammad. Now, why is Muhammad's uncle doing this? Because he was actually the leader of the tribe, and his word had a lot of weight. So, like his decision, everyone had to abide by his decision. But the tribe was pressuring him to change his, opinion and hand his nephew to them. So his deal, if this document proved different from what Muhammad claimed, then he will allow them to do whatever they wanted with him. Otherwise, they should end the embargo. They agreed. Predictably, the document proved to be as Muhammad had described, but they changed their mind and they refused to honor the promise that they made. So this is, here we see like one instance in which an animal intervenes in the course of events in the early history of Islam. The impact is not very significant. The termite's role does not seem to change anything, but I think it must have encouraged that group that coalesced against the embargo, to go further. And they continued to insist until it was lifted. I think also it must have consoled Muhammad and his followers, to tell them that God and the entire non-human creation was on their side. So there must have been a psychological, impact, favorable impact in all of this. This is one of many instances where a non-human being intervened in these in Muslims' early history. But we have many actually other examples. In the decades preceding and following the advent of Islam, non-human beings reportedly protected Mecca's shrine from, an attack. They proselytized Islam, they played a role in Muslim social and political life, and they even seem to have contributed to Islam's ritual practices. Several sources also describe instances in which they requested, non-human beings, especially non-human animals, requested and obtained help from Muhammad, further illustrating this faith-based sense of interspecies affinity. Stories describing such interactions indicate that non-human beings were perceived as agents and partners who contributed to Muslims' history and helped to shape their social, political, and ritual lives. So I start by describing the protective role when non-human animals were there to protect Muslims. Non-human animals' protective role began even before the advent of Islam in the year that became known as the Year of the Elephant. In the hope of redirecting pilgrims to a cathedral that he built in Yemen, the governor of Yemen came to Mecca and attacked the Kaaba, the holy shrine, with an army that included both human beings and non-human animals, especially elephants, in fact. So his plan was to destroy the Kaaba so that, pilgrims will no longer go to Mecca but go to the cathedral that he built. Interestingly, resistance in this case came only from non-human animals, including one that is in this governor's own army, Abraha's own army. So as they approach the shrine, someone whispers in the elephant's ear, telling him that he is, like heading toward God's shrine and God's city, and because of this, he should not actually be part of this destruction. He should not destroy the Kaaba. So this elephant, he receives a name in the tradition. His name is Mahmud. Like they exert enormous pressure on him to go forward to the Kaaba. He refuses. He totally refuses. And in the meantime, there is an army of birds, a flock of birds armed with pebbles. They attack the army and they kill nearly everyone. Only 2 people are spared. So here, human beings actually do not interfere at all. In fact, the Prophet's uncle and, no, at this time it's his grandfather, before his uncle becomes the leader of the Quraysh. His grandfather has a meeting with Abraha, the governor of Yemen, and he asks to have back his camels. And the governor is shocked, like, how can you ask for your camels when we are about to destroy your holy shrine? He says, oh, I don't need to worry about that. I worry about my animals. God is going to worry about the Kaaba. So, I don't need to worry about that. And effectively, this is what happens. We have the elephant and the birds, which take care of the, of this, destroying this army and defending the Kaaba. So this is one of the instances where we have non-human animals protect one of Muslims' important assets. Okay, so this event is also recorded in the Quran, but the Hadith expounds on the Quranic account in many ways. It identifies the historical context and human and non-human actors, even by giving names to the elephant and to the governor and everyone. It spells out the underlying motivations in this war, the fact that Abraha wants to redirect people to his cathedral, and overall it expands the plot of this narrative. However, the significance, I think, like in the 2 cases, is different. Whereas the Quran uses this story to illustrate God's, the general, universal rule that God is always going to defeat the unjust and that he can enact his will in several ways. I think in the Hadith, what it does highlight the non-human interaction or affinity. So, for example, humans and non-humans in this case communicate. Someone whispers in the ear of the elephant, and the elephant understands. So we see that humans and non-humans in this case can communicate in the Hadith narrative. Furthermore, many accounts state that the Prophet was born actually in the year of the elephant. Regardless of whether this is historically accurate or not, the mere association is meaningful. It indicates that consciously or subconsciously, Muslims viewed non-human animals as allies and partners who preceded humans in preparing the ground for the Prophet's mission. It is as if the non-human world has already sensed that the newborn infant was to be sent as God's messenger and started sending signals indicating that they would be there for him and for his, for Muslims in general. The fact that the year in which the Prophet is supposedly born is called the year of the elephant. It's given this non-human name, is part of this message. I think that in itself has, indicates this or hints to this forthcoming alliance. The protective role continued after the advent of Islam. Besides the termite episode, which I have already discussed, some creatures are reported to have been there for Muhammad when he emigrated from Mecca to Medina. This is after his uncle dies and he loses the protection within his tribe, so now he becomes totally vulnerable. Therefore, he decides to leave his native city, Mecca. Is it something I did? Okay. All right. So Muhammad has to go somewhere else because now that he lost his uncle's protection, he becomes vulnerable, and he faced the possibility of being killed. During this emigration, Muhammad emigrates with his friend Abu Bakr, and his tribe, the Quraysh, sends chasers behind them to capture them and to bring them back dead or alive. How does Muhammad, evade them? He and his friend Abu Bakr go inside a cave where they hide. The chasers actually come to this cave, but what they see is that a spider has weaved her web at the entrance of the cave. Two doves set their nests there, and a tree also is grown there. So when the chasers arrive there, they conclude that no one could have set foot in the cave in a long, long time. So here we have, these creatures, the tree, the two doves, and the spider, in fact, not only save Muhammad and his friends' lives, but by playing this role in this specific historical juncture, they allow the message of Muhammad to survive. Without this, not only that Muhammad would have died, but also his message would have died with him. So here they allow for the continued existence of Muhammad's mission. However, not all non-human beings were as protective as the previous scenes indicate. Some reports state that Abraha's army included another elephant who who obeyed the governor, who proceeded actually toward the Kaaba and obeyed the governor. He wanted to destroy it, and he was punished along with others. So what does this mean? To me, it means that animals, according to the hadith, can actually make their own decisions. They have a will, and they can make both good and bad moral choices. Another more interesting story concerns the two mountains that we have here. So during the Prophet's emigration, the same episode that involves the doves and the spider, so during this flight to Medina, one report mentions that a mountain called Thabir begged the Prophet not to remain on its top, lest God punish him or punish it if the Quraysh tribe found and killed him while he was there. This led another mountain, the mountain Hira. The black one is Thabir, supposedly, and according to the internet, and Hira is the lighter one. So this led Hira to invite the Prophet to go to it. However, Islamic sources do not treat Thabir's reluctance as a sign of rejection. This is not like the elephant who proceeded to destroy the Kaaba. Al-Qari al-Harawi says that Thabir was overcome with fear, whereas Hira was filled with hope. And in Islamic tradition, fear of God and hope for His mercy are actually two emotions that are treated as extreme signs of faith. Like every Muslim is recommended to have fear of God and hope for His mercy. So here, these are signs of piety, and we see that the two mountains have, experienced these emotions and these feelings, which indicates that they fit in the profile of good believer, right? Although they are not as protective of the Prophet as many other creatures, one of them at least, they still are good Muslim creatures. The protective role is not limited to life-threatening situations. Once the Prophet needed to relieve himself, but the only two trees that could give him privacy were not close enough to perform this function. The Prophet asked one of his companions to tell the trees to move closer to one another with God's leave, which they did. Doves are said also to have been there for Muhammad when he entered Mecca victoriously. Some reports state that the doves of the sacred sites flew over him, perhaps to shield him from the sun's heat or to celebrate Muslims' victory. Similarly, a cloud accompanied the Prophet to be Muhammad, this is before Muhammad received the message, during a trip to Syria, and trees bent over him when he rested, presumably to protect him from the sun's heat. These acts also made him identifiable to as a future prophet to a monk, a Christian monk called Bahira. So when this monk saw how the everything was trying to protect Muhammad, clouds, trees, etc., he thought this must be a prophet, a forthcoming prophet, because according to him, according to the report attributed to him, these creatures will not do that except when it is the case of a prophet. These also signs made him identifiable to a slave of his employer, the person who eventually becomes his wife, Khadija. So like in this, he was trading in the name of Khadija in this trip of a very wealthy woman in his tribe, Quraysh. The slave who accompanied him made, through these signs, could also identify him as a special person and recommended him as a, a good suitor for his wife, who, because of this, after that, proposed to him. And so several features are detectable. I would like now to analyze some of these narratives. So several features are detectable in these narratives. While most creatures are depicted as protective of Muslims and their sacred assets, one also notes the diversity of the means through which protection is secured. Non-human animals can resort to physical might, like the birds, or to passive resistance, like the elephant. It is, of course, remarkable that an animal that humans often consider the epitome of physical strength, the elephant, resorts to passive resistance, whereas tiny creatures like birds have the more active role. They are doing like most of the killing and, waging the kind of more fearsome part of the war, right? I think the underlying, or one of the underlying messages could be that non-human animals cannot perhaps be reduced to humans' images and stereotypes. Furthermore, non-human beings often use their ordinary skills, as opposed to miracles, to perform their protective roles. The cloud shields Muhammad from the sun merely by hanging over him, whereas the spider and the doves conceal him by weaving a spider web and building a bird's nest. The only unusual aspect is that these ordinary acts are performed seemingly with the deliberate intention of helping Muhammad and his companions. The theme of intentionality is most evident in the anecdotes involving the elephant and the mountains. These creatures adopt different positions based on different inner states, which signals their perceived individuality, intentionality, and personal agency. The episode involving the two trees provides an additional illustration of this point. In this episode, the trees are not depicted as objects moved by outside forces, whether divine or otherwise. They are active parties. The Prophet's companion does not pray to God to move these trees, but talks to the trees in person. So asking them to move by God's leave. This is still a theocentric world where nothing can take place except with God's permission. However, in this world, God has endowed trees with agency, just as he did with humans. In other words, this is not a world where God and humans are the only active parties, whereas all others are mere objects forming the inert background of the human divine drama, right? Like they are actually active parties. So humans and non-humans interact and negotiate their relations. Furthermore, this is not a world where humans have authority over other creatures. Neither the Prophet nor the companion issued orders to the trees, but instead they asked them to move by God's leave. The image is thus of a world where humans and trees, or humans and non-human, like creatures in general, form a community of believers who help one another based on their own will, and yet with God's help and guidance. So, like, it's quite interesting for me. This is, like when someone asks the tree to move from its place by God's leave, right? There is no indication of like outside authority, or like they are not praying to God to move the tree. And this is like they're asking the tree to move. Okay, so this, I think, it gives us an idea about the non-human beings' protective role in the early Muslim history. Non-human beings also provided psychological support, especially for the Prophet. And what is more interesting is that they proselytized Islam. Many sources affirm that even before he recovered or he received the message, a stone in Mecca used to greet Muhammad, saying, "Peace be upon you, messenger of God." The stone thus acted as a precursor to the Archangel Gabriel, Gabriel's more formal introduction of Muhammad to his prophetic role. So like when Muhammad receives the message, like when he reaches the age of 40, the tradition tells us that after, like the Archangel Gabriel comes to him, recites verses of the Quran to him, and Muhammad is totally shocked. He does not understand what is happening. And after all of this, the angel addresses Muhammad, telling him that he is God's messenger. He repeats this many times. I am Gabriel, and the angel Gabriel, you are God's messenger. But here we see that a stone actually precedes Muhammad in introducing him to this role. The anecdotes involving the monk Bahira, the Christian monk who identifies Muhammad as a future prophet, can also fit into this category. This monk could recognize Muhammad as a future prophet because stones and trees prostrated themselves to him, which, according to Bahira, they did only to a prophet. These anecdotes show that in the hadith, non-human beings not only have interiority and types of cognition inaccessible to the average human, but also that in some areas, the scope of their knowledge exceeds that of humans. Of course, the anecdotes derive their weight mainly from the element of the miraculous that surrounds Muhammad. The fact that even stones can communicate with him and that they know about him and respect him. However, it is remarkable that earthly non-human beings, including inanimate objects, are chosen to perform these miracles when God could, for example, have chosen an angel to perform this, instead of non-human beings. So this shows that according to these sources, non-human beings, earthly non-human beings, are perceived as credible and fit to contribute to Islam's sacred history. The hadith non-human beings also proselytized Islam. During one of his travels, the Prophet invited a Bedouin to testify that there was no deity other than God and that Muhammad was God's messenger, asking a tree to attest to the truthfulness of his claims. The tree duly moved to get closer to Muhammad, and his interlocutor testified and returned to her place. Another Bedouin swore that he would believe in Muhammad only if a lizard the Bedouin had just captured did first. So the Prophet asked the lizard, "Who do you worship?" The one whose throne is in the heavens, whose dominion is in the earth, whose path is in the oceans, whose mercy is in the garden, and whose punishment is in the fire, the lizard replied. "And who am I?" Muhammad followed. "You are the messenger of the Lord of the worlds and the seal of prophets. He who believes in you will flourish, and he who disbelieves you will perish," the lizard affirmed. This anecdote evokes a Quranic narrative in several ways. This Quranic narrative occurs in Surah number 27, titled Surah An-Naml, or the Ants, verses 20 to 21. So let me provide a little bit of background about this surah. So in this surah, the part of the section, the narrative, tells us that Prophet Solomon, the biblical figure Solomon, who is treated as a prophet, considered a prophet in Islamic scripture, he and his army came by a colony of ants. And in this Quranic narrative, when the ant senses they're coming, she addresses fellow ants, telling them to go inside their homes, lest Solomon and his army destroy them. And she says, "Go inside so that Solomon and his army do not destroy you without knowing." So she says also that if they do this, they are not doing it deliberately. So this is the Quranic narrative. So in Surah An-Naml, we learn about, also there is, like in the same passage after that, there is a bird or a hoopoe who learns about the Queen of Sheba, comes back to Solomon with a report on her, telling the Queen of Sheba, telling Solomon that the Queen of Sheba and her people worship the sun. They prostrate themselves to the sun. And he's amazed, like how can they prostrate themselves to the sun instead of God? And he says, instead of God, who brings forth that which is hidden? So he provides a reason why it's God alone who should be worshipped. This is the Quranic narrative. And I believe that there are many parallels between the narrative in the Hadith and the narrative in the Quran. So in Surah Al-Naml, we learn about a hoopoe who knows Solomon is a prophet, just as the Hadith lizard knows that Muhammad is God's messenger. Similarly, both animals know about God and worship him alone. More interestingly, the faith of both is rooted in informed views and rational analysis instead of unconscious or mechanical instinct as it is usually presumed. The hoopoe is perplexed that the Queen of Sheba and her people prostrate themselves to the sun instead of God, offering God's ability to bring forth that which is hidden as a justification for why God alone should be worshipped. Exegetical sources point out that hoopoes can detect underground objects. This shows, so like according to this narrative, this shows that the bird can appreciate God's ability to reveal what is hidden because of his own detection skill. It's like being good at this particular thing that makes him appreciate this particular divine attribute. This actually evokes something else in the Quran. It evokes the magicians around the Pharaoh and Moses. So the magicians, like in the Quranic narrative, after Moses performs his miracle, they accept Moses' message. And exegetes say that because they're so good at magic, they can appreciate the miracle provided by Moses. So how someone's skill guides them to faith. In this case, instance, the hoopoe's skill of detection guides him to faith in the same way that the magician's skill guides them to faith. The mere fact that the bird offers a reason why God alone should be worshipped points to his ability to process ideas, and the same applies to the lizard. By citing a list of divine attributes in answer to the question, whom do you worship? The lizard's faith proves to be rooted in awareness and profound appreciation of these attributes. Both animals also know about God's throne and take it as a sign of God's majesty. This shows that in the Quran and in the Hadith, rather than being a matter of instinct, as most seem to believe, animals' faith is actually founded, or at least on heightened awareness, sophisticated knowledge, and cognitive processes about God, his attributes, and his creation. Some non-human beings proselytized Muhammad's message even without being asked. One anecdote describes a wolf encouraging a shepherd to seek the prophet, promising to look after the sheep during the shepherd's absence. I know. In fact, the wolf initially captures one of the sheep. He's hungry. And the shepherd captures back the sheep and deprives the wolf of his meal. So the wolf is upset. He wants to have his meal. But then the person, is astonished, like how a sheep can talk. And when he sees this, he says, there is something even more strange that is happening at your time. There is a prophet in Mecca. Have you heard about him? He says, no, I haven't. He says, why don't you go seek this prophet and I will look after the sheep. So in this narrative, the wolf is not just, like a wolf. He's a hungry wolf who has just captured a sheep. Yet he is able to control his instincts. He does not, and he prioritizes matters of faith over like the mere instinct. Okay, so, and the person ends up, like finding Muhammad and accepting the message. So the wolf's effort were not lost. It was, all right. So this is about, like this proselytizing role that we find in the Hadith. I'm actually like, this is like the section that I find most interesting. The fact that non-human animals were also, played also a role in political events, in social and political events. But maybe before going there, I will, yeah. So non-human animals also participated in Muslim social and political life. After moving to Medina, Muhammad entrusted his she-camel with selecting the site of his home and the Holy Mosque, which became the second holiest place in Islam after the mosque in Mecca. As Muhammad was looking for a site, he passed by a number of Muslims, that is human beings, human Muslims, each inviting him to settle among them, offering various justifications for why he should choose them. To each group, Muhammad replied, "Allow the camel to proceed, for God has commanded her to pick the site. خلوا سبيل الناقة فإنها مأمورة." When the camel finally lied down, the Prophet declared the site to be the place to be the site of his home and the sacred mosque. Now, a skeptical reader could interpret Muhammad's behavior as a tactful attempt to avoid offending his friend's feelings and charges of favoritism. Like by making the camel choose the site, he does not make anyone around him, any human being around him, angry. This perhaps is somewhat justified, but I don't think that it accounts fully for this anecdote. The charge of favoritism could actually been avoided in other ways. For example, the Prophet could have accepted the first offer that came his way, or God could have sent an angel to select the site. But Muhammad wanted the camel to choose this place. Also, this interpretation, which perhaps wants to dismiss the role of the camel, does not account for the fact that the Prophet says that she is commended, presumably by God. So here the camel is deliberately chosen by God to choose the site of the mosque. So to my mind, this affirmation indicates that God deliberately assigned this task to the camel, which for me again leaves no room for doubt that the hadith non-human animals have their own relationship with and receive direct guidance from God. This relationship allows them to be active participants in the foundation of the Muslim polity. Years later, Muhammad's she-camel, the same I believe she-camel, played a vital role in the events that led to the signing of the Hudaybiyah Treaty, which is a turning point in Muslims' early history. In the 6th year after the Hijrah, after the emigration from Mecca to Medina, and when the Muslim state basically starts in Medina, but it's still very modest. So 6 years from that, Muhammad and his companions headed to Mecca, hoping to perform the minor pilgrimage. Now, the Quraysh were required to allow Muhammad and his companions to perform the pilgrimage because this is, as custodians of the holy places, they had this obligation as per, tribal ethos at the time. However, they did not want to allow it because if they allowed it, they were afraid that the other Arab tribes would interpret this as a sign of defeat. So they did not know what to do. While struggling, and envoyees are going both ways from Muhammad and his group to Quraysh and back and forth, the she-camel lies on the ground and refuses to proceed. And the Prophet's companions accuse her of being obstinate. Muhammad says this is not her moral caliber. She is not someone who acts whimsically. So again, Muhammad uses the word moral to describe the behavior of his camel. And he says actually that the same thing that deterred the elephant from going forward to the Kaaba many decades earlier is now deterring her from moving toward Mecca at this time. So in both cases, it seems that the animals are acting with compliance to, divine inspiration or divine something is reaching them from God directly. As usual, so Muhammad came to the defense of the camel, and he says, "ما ذاك لها بخلق." So this is not like her moral caliber, basically. So this crisis, the crisis that resulted from this conflict eventually led to the signing of the Hudaybiyah peace treaty, which stipulated the following terms. In this treaty, pilgrims, like Muhammad and his companions, had to, go back to Medina and not perform the pilgrimage this year, with the promise that the Mecca will be emptied for their sake the following year for a number of days. But it also had many other terms that Muslims found quite difficult to kind of process. Some of the terms said that, if someone went back from Islam to polytheism, someone reverted to polytheism, then they should, Meccans were not obligated to give that person to Muslims. But if a Meccan embraced Islam and wanted to join the Muslim community in Medina, Muslims had to bring that person back to Quraysh. Muslims were very annoyed and very disappointed with this term. But actually, the Prophet, pressured them to accept it, and they did. And this turned out to be a major gain for them. It was actually the first major turning point in early Islamic history. Why? First of all, just by signing the contract, the rest of the other Arabian tribes, now saw that Muhammad and his community have become, important enough to be able to negotiate agreements with Quraysh, right? So they are now on the discussion table, basically. Also, like another thing that is part of this treaty is that they signed a truce for 10 years, and that truce freed Muslims to be less preoccupied with warfare and to focus on building their state and their community. So it actually turned out to be a major gain. Also, the Quraysh violated the terms of this treaty, and Muhammad went back to Mecca 2 years later. He entered Mecca peacefully but victoriously. So we see here that, in fact, that act that's initiated by the camel, turned things totally in the favor of Muslims. So this shows how she influenced the way historical events proceeded and were in favor of Muslims. All right. The cursor does not want to move. All right. Can someone help me? I don't know how to. Oh. It's moving here, but.
Went over there instead of here.
The cursor does not want to come to the screen. It's
traveled computers and needs to be on this computer.
Here, thank you. It went back. Why is it doing this? Yeah, so I cannot move things here.
If it happens again, you can just, if it's over here, bring it over this way, or sorry, not the other way. It's kind of counterintuitive, but if you go off this side, it ends up back here.
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Now, there is another thing which is quite interesting, actually, in the contribution of non-human beings to Islam. They seem to have even contributed like a ritual act, although one that is, it's not like one of the major ritual acts of Islam. The young companion, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, one of the Prophet's young companions, reportedly described to the Prophet a dream whereby he witnessed the reaction of inanimate objects to the Quran. In this dream, Abu Sa'id was writing Surah Sad, Surah number 38, and when he reached verse 24, which mentions that Prophet David fell into prostration to God, he saw, all of this is in the dream, he saw that everything around him also fell in prostration, including his inkwell and his pen and everything. So when Abu Sa'id described this to the Prophet started doing the same. Every time he reached that verse, he also fell in prostration, and this became a sajda verse in Islam, meaning that when Muslims recite this verse, they also fall in prostration to God. So this is a ritual act, a minor one, not like one of the major ones, but seems to be inspired by the reaction of non-human beings. Now, of course, there is a difference between this one and the previous, all the previous material, in that this is founded on a dream. However, I believe that the outcome of this dream still conveys the idea that non-human being spirituality is, like a valid form of spirituality, and that they could actually function as guides for Muslims, like in the way they worship God. So all of this tells us what animals and non-human beings did to Muslims, but Muslims were also there for non-human animals, especially the Prophet. So non-human beings were also at the receiving end of this relationship. First, Muhammad never failed to show gratitude for other creatures' acts of kindness. In return for the spiders' and doves' effort to hide him during his emigration to Medina, he reportedly characterized spiders as God's soldiers and instructed Muslims not to kill them. He also prayed for the two doves. Some sources tell us that the doves that continue to live in Mecca, in the holy spaces of Mecca, are the descendants of these two doves, and this is thanks to the Prophet's prayer. Furthermore, Muhammad was always there for animals who requested his help. One of the best-known examples is that of a captured doe who asked Muhammad to release her so that she was captured by a Bedouin. So she asked him to release her so that she can go back to her fawns to suckle them, promising that she will return immediately. Muhammad first releases her, but then he intercedes on her behalf and allows her to be reunited with her fawns for, permanently after that. A camel who complained that his owners underfed and overworked him similarly obtained the help he hoped for. The Prophet stroked his back and to alleviate his sadness, and then ordered the owners to fear God lest he punish them in the way they treated the animal. Another camel cried when he saw the Prophet because his owners were planning to kill him now that his old age made him less valuable to them. One version of the hadith states that Muhammad offered to buy the camel to save his life. However, the owners simply gave the camel to him and he spared his life. Another version of this same narrative depicts a more vibrant scenario. In this case, the agitated camel confides something to the Prophet. After calming the animal, the Prophet cautioned him to stick to the truth, because if he was lying, his lies are going to count against him. After that, the Prophet confronts the owners. He tells them, this camel has the worst complaints about you. He says that for many years, he carried your loads to fertile pastures in the summer and to warm abodes in the winter. Through him, God increased your herd. Yet now that he has reached old age, you want to kill him. The owners confirmed the story of the camel. To which the Prophet responded, this is not how you reward a good slave. As in the first version, Muhammad offers to buy the camel, but he is given to the Prophet and he spares his life. The elaborate version has several noteworthy features. While its primary aim is to highlight Muhammad's compassion toward animals, it also portrays the animal of being able to misrepresent, the truth, to lie. This again recalls the Quranic hoopoe, who was similarly suspected and subsequently exonerated from deception, and the Prophet's she-camel, who was equally accused of and acquitted of obstinacy. This shows that in Islamic scriptures, that Islamic scriptures ascribe morality and free will to non-human animals. However, so like non-human animals seem to have free will. However, more often they opt for good choices. However, they are still capable of making bad choices, as we see in the case of the elephant. It is also notable that the Prophet objected to the killing of the camel, even though the Quran and the Hadith authorize killing for food and disallow interference with this authorization. While the legal dimension of this subject is outside the scope of this presentation, it is still noteworthy that in this particular case, Muhammad prioritized the animal's feelings over legal instructions. Okay, so the hadith also actually portrays non-human beings as having this very profound, deep love for the Prophet. Hadith sources, so they highlight this. Muhammad is reported to have said about the mountain Uhud in Medina, "This is a mountain that loves us and one that we love in return." This hadith thus ascribes feelings even to inanimate creatures, and affirms that the Prophet and non-human beings share a mutual affection. Another report says that during one of his travels, a tree moved toward the Prophet while he was napping and then returned to her original place. When Muhammad's companions informed him of this, he explained that the tree had requested permission from God to greet him. The tree then seems to have experienced the same loving feelings that many humans have for the Prophet, and seeing the intensity of her feelings, God granted her the ability to have a closer look at him. Another possible illustration of this theme is encountered in the well-known story of the palm trunk. As the believers' numbers increased, the Prophet needed a higher platform to address them, leading him to accept an offer to replace the trunk against which he used to lean when he gave his sermons with a pulpit. Overwhelmed with grief, the trunk moaned in a sound hearable to the congregation. Because of this, the Prophet embraced it and gave it the choice to either resume its function, like to be like the informal pulpit for the Prophet, or to be planted in heaven, and the trunk chose to be planted in heaven. Love for the Prophet also benefited animals, both human and non-human. In the hope of being granted a request, one night, the Prophet's she-camel, Al-Abba, this is another camel different from the one that we have encountered first, reportedly began by telling him about her life before she met him. So what does she say? She says, "I used to belong to a man from the Quraysh, the Prophet's tribe. But I ran away from him and found myself in the desert. Yet nothing happened to me because predators recognized me as your future mount. They used to call one another saying, 'Do not harm her, for she will belong to Muhammad.' In the morning," Al-Abba continued, "every tree I passed by invited me to eat from it, also because they knew I was to become yours." After this autobiographical note, Al-Abba requests that she be among the Prophet's mounts in heaven, and he grants her that. He accepts that. So we're running out of time? Yes, okay, so I'm about to finish, actually. This is like, very close. So this story actually has a parallel at the human level. The Prophet's servant once travels and he is shipwrecked. He finds himself in a jungle. A lion finds him, so he fears for his life. When this happens, he informs the lion that of his relationship with the Prophet. Because of this, the lion not only spares him, but also shows him the way back and, greets him farewell as well. So I believe, I'll just end here. What we see here is that the hadith clearly from these anecdotes, and there is actually a lot more, I just chose these for this presentation, clearly ascribes interiority, internationality, agency, feelings, not only to non-human animals. I mean, it's more clear in the case of non-human animals, but also even including inanimate beings, like all beings. The hadith, by the way, is not treated by Muslims, Muslims treat the Quran as God's word, like God's word verbatim. The hadith is surrounded by some doubt. Some of it is like treated as definitely the Prophet's word, but there is the issue of authenticity. Like different hadiths have different ratings, like from being definitely authentic to being definitely fabricated with others in between, right? So Muslims do not trust every hadith or every report attributed to the Prophet as being authentic. Nonetheless, the material itself is there, whether it is authentic or not. Like it does not only tell us about like how the Prophet in reality treated or thought about animals or other non-human beings, but how Muslims after him as well tried to imagine animals. In fact, I think the very last anecdote about Al-Adba is totally fabricated. There is no trace of it in early sources. Yet, this is how Muslims liked to think about a non-human animal in relation to the Prophet. I think this gives an idea about what I wanted to say today, and thank you very much for listening to me. I'm more than happy to answer your questions if I can. What, if any, are did consciousness alterity plans play in early Islam? I think for early Muslims, they did not, of course, think of animals and plants the way we tend to think now. Like the scientific thinking dominates our way of approaching things. Like for everything or anything to be accepted, to have validity, like it has to run through the, like through the scientific lens, right? This is not something that we share with people from pre-modern times. They relied more on the way they experienced things. And I think another way that they differ from us is that they lived very close to animals, especially in Arabia. It's not just the domestic animals, like the animals that they raise, but also wild animals. They traveled a lot. They had to make hunting journeys, and they encountered, like predators, different animals, and they like the indigenous population in America, for example. They thought that they had some sort of communication with animals. So in this respect, they had pacts with the animal, for example. They could, in this respect, they had like this ideas about animals. It's not in the same way that we think about them today, but I'm sure that for them, animals were not mere objects. They were fellow creatures, like that shared the world with them and with whom they needed to like negotiate life and like who can be killed and who can survive and all of that. So I guess like in this respect, they differ from us. All right. I hope I'm answering the questions. How many times does the Quran talk about animals acting in Allah's will? So many times, I don't know the number, but it's really like a very, I think it's the very prominent theme in the Quran. For example, we have like one instance is when the Pharaoh insists in rejecting Moses' message, God sends against the Pharaoh and his people a number of animals, not just animals, but animals are part of this, frogs and ticks and, like to attack him. So like the instance about the elephant is recorded in the Quran. There are actually, and there are many instances, and of course it's not just like like punishment, like in these punishment stories. Animals are also like they are there. For example, when Adam's children, one of them kills the other, and he does not know what to do. God sends a raven to teach him how to bury the dead. So yeah, they're all over the place, and they're always acting, I think, in God's like name. Do you find any contradictions between the two scriptures in explaining or showing the role of inanimate creatures? I don't think I see any contradictions. In fact, one of the main things, or one of the way I try to build my argument is by highlighting the similarities between the Quran and the Hadith. Muslims accept the Quran as God's word, but they do not trust the hadith 100% the way they trust the Quran. So for me, the fact that the hadith, in fact, has the same approach to animals, and it treats like the same themes and expands on them, you know. So the Quran, for example, affirms that all non-human beings, including inanimate beings, praise the hymns of God, right? The hadith gives illustrations of this. I don't think that the hadith contradicts the Quran at all. In fact, it expands on the same themes and illustrates them, explicates them. And this, for me, even when the hadith, you know, like a hadith does not have a high rating, because it conforms to the Quran's message, I think this allows it to be part of the tradition, even if it does not actually go back to the Prophet himself. So I'm totally willing to accept that some of these hadiths are not authored by the Prophet, yet I think they're inspired by the Quran and the Prophet's other teachings. Do you see influences of the portrayal of animals in the Quran and Hadith in later works in the Arab literary tradition? I'm thinking of Al-Jahid, but I'm sure there are other instances. Oh, definitely. So I think that in the Islamic intellectual tradition, there are two strands, I believe, that evolve from this. We have many thinkers, many scholars, Quran exegetes, etc., which strive to de-emphasize these themes. So, for example, when the Quran speaks about a hoopoe that speaks and, you know, like has this kind of interesting message to deliver to Solomon, they will say, okay, this is a miracle. It does not mean that all birds or hoopoes are like this. It applies only to this bird, and this is because it's a miracle. Same with the ant. It's only this ant that can speak to her community. It does not mean that all ants have the ability to. When the Quran speaks about like creatures performing, you know, like these hymning praises, it's again, this is, we should understand this metaphorically. Al-Jahid is one of these people. He is a rationalist. So he will not accept anything except if it can fit, you know, like it can pass the test of reason. You know, like if our human reason can conform this, then yes, we can accept it. Otherwise, we have to find a way to explain it away. So this is one section, I think, of the tradition. There is a good number of other scholars, what, you know, like in the field of Islamic studies, they're called traditionalists. They're a lot more accepting, you know, like they say, if the Quran says that the ant speaks, it means that the ant speaks. It's, you know, like it's our limitation that we cannot understand how the, you know, like the ants speak. You know, they actually say that humans are too limited to be able to appreciate God's creation. And so I find that the kind of more traditional group has a less anthropocentric approach to these scriptures. You know, like humans are limited, humans know less, humans are not capable of appreciating God's creation, whereas the rationalists know, like we can understand everything, and whenever something does not fit to our expectations, we are going to find a way of explaining it away. And this, I mean, I think it continues until the present day. But of course, in our present day, I think most of us have become traditionalists. Rationalists. I'm hoping that with the new findings of science, we may consider, you know, like our approach to the non-human world. Is it haram or makruh to kill animals for no reason? It is entirely haram. It's totally forbidden. So the Quran and the Hadith allow killing for food. Not only actually that they allow killing for food, they disallow any interference with this permission. So what does this mean? This means that if someone does not want to eat meat, they're fine. They don't have to eat meat, right? However, promoting vegetarianism as a moral choice, you know, presenting it as something that is more consistent with God's will, this is what both scriptures seem to, in my analysis, seem to stand against. Of course, some Muslims disagree with me on this point, but I believe there is good evidence to show that the Quran and the Hadith, not only that they authorize killing for food, but they do not allow anyone to interfere with this permission. So they are against moral vegetarianism. Killing for food is totally fine. Killing to defend yourself from something, like a predator that is attacking you, for example, or an animal that is harming you, that also is fine. Wanton killing, the hadith affirms, there is a hadith actually which says that any human being who kills a sparrow or anything above it will be held accountable in the afterlife for that. That animal will plead to God saying that so-and-so killed me for no reason. So there is accountability for killing animals for no reason. Now, the phrase above that, it is usually understood as anything that is bigger than the sparrow, but some also understand it as anything that is smaller. Through this, it means that any animal, even insects, cannot be killed for no reason. If you have a good reason, like defending yourself, etc. Now, of course, a good reason can be expanded, or, so the Hanafi school of law, for example, say that any way you can benefit from an animal makes it legitimate for us to kill it. So like if you want to kill an animal so that you can benefit from their hide, a predator, for example, you cannot eat the flesh, but you can benefit from their hide or the bones or something like that. They say this makes it permissible to kill the animal. Other schools say no. They say, we have been given permission only to kill for food, and we cannot go beyond that point. It's only killing for food. These are the Shafi'is. In fact, they say if someone's sheep, for example, swallows a diamond that is many, many times the price of that, the market price of that sheep, the person is not allowed to kill the sheep just to get back the diamond, even if this means if they intend to eat the sheep later on, the flesh later on, because their primary intention was not to eat the flesh, but to get back that diamond. So the animal's life is sacred. And again, there are differences in how people evaluate the sacredness, but wanton killing is definitely totally disallowed. I have heard stories, hadiths about snakes and their relationship to Islamic stories. What conclusions or what are your thoughts on this matter? I'm not sure what the exact point of this question is. Yes, there are snakes in the hadith. Some of the hadiths present snakes as if they are incarnations of jinn. And because of this, they say don't kill them, because actually they are jinn. But I think there is a good number of hadiths also which discuss snakes as snakes. And snakes are could be one of 5 species of animals that the Prophet gave Muslims permission to kill. In fact, yes, it's not again wanton killing, but there are 5 species that Muslims are authorized to kill. These include scorpions and mice. So it's animals that can be really, harmful to humans, and especially in the case of mice, because they tend to live in our homes, right, and destroy our property, and So in some lists, snakes are included, but not in all of them. Some lists do not include snakes at all. There is one hadith which I find very interesting. The Prophet is sitting in this hadith with his companions, and a snake shows up, and the Prophet tells them, kill the snake. But the snake escapes. It evades them. What does the Prophet say? He says, God has protected her from your evil, and he protected you from her evil. So in this hadith, yes, snakes can harm us, but we also can harm them. It's not only our lives that matter, but their lives also matter. But of course, we are like everyone else. We have the right to defend them ourselves. So if a snake is there and it's a threat, we can kill it. Can you comment on the extensive place of animals, birds in Islamic art, literature? Example, Conference of the Birds. Yes. I haven't done work on this. In fact, yes, the literature on animals in Islamic tradition is so abundant and so multifaceted. It's just fascinating. When I was a PhD student, in the very early stage, trying to select a topic, I was totally bewildered. like it was just an ocean of material waiting for someone to analyze it, and I didn't know. But then, I thought like, okay, the Quran is the natural starting point. I was hoping, like after the Quran, I thought like it will take a chapter or two, and then, like do the hadith in another chapter, and then do Islamic tradition in the rest of the book. It ended up, like I'm still working on the Quran and hardly moving to the hadith. So there is a lot. I'm hoping that, like the field will attract more people, and I think actually more people are like the field is attracting a lot of attention now. So we will see about that. But unfortunately, I'm not able to answer your question here. How does evolution play a part in your research? When considering evolution, can't you say the smartness elevation of animals is Islam is caused by evolution, i.e., where the fitness of a non-human being was selected by nature, not Islam? Well, I mean, these are two different like spheres of knowledge, two different methodologies, like two competing even, I don't want to say ideologies, but worldviews, like what matters for me, like is not, like at the end of the day, like what evolution or religion, what science, religion, like try to tell us about truth. It's a matter of personal faith, like where you fit there. What matters for me is also like, like how does this play out in real life? How does science, for example, impact our attitudes toward animals? And how does faith in general like impact our attitudes to animals, right? And both are very complex, like science, like evolution, science in general is not a monolith. It's a very diverse, ways of approaching the natural world. But I mean, we will see that science has had mechanistic science, which has been the dominant version of science over the last few centuries, has had a very detrimental impact on the natural world. It treated animals, like Descartes, for example. For him, animals are machines. They are soulless machines. What does this mean? It means that you can do whatever you want with them. They don't feel pain. They are, they don't have souls and they don't feel pain. This facilitated the abuse of animals. It facilitated the abuse of the natural world. It erased that sense of wonder. Nature became a resource. Also, like with evolution, with like these scientific methods, they center the human being and they trust the human mind way too much. I feel, like there are other schools of scientific inquiry which in fact are a lot more humble, and they see that, like nature is so complex and so rich, and like you start exploring one dimension and it takes you like in new paths and it opens new doors. I guess like what I'm trying to say, yes, each worldview has something to offer. I totally believe in evolution. I don't think that it contradicts actually scripture. So it's not like, for me, this is not like a controversial point, but the underlying worldview is something, like whether I accept this as in terms of faith or in terms of scientific method, it's a personal thing. What needs to be taken into consideration in this discussion is also the impact, how each worldview shapes our attitudes toward the natural world. What's the opinion on Darwinism? Well, I guess I have already dealt with that. Yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't know like if there's anything else to add to this. Okay. I don't know if I have answered this. Yeah, I have answered this. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope I answered at least some of the questions, and I apologize if I haven't answered them, like properly. Thank you very much.
I want to thank our speaker so much for such an amazing talk and engaging our questions. I also want to invite all of you. We have a small reception where we can continue our discussions. And also, I just wanted to make everyone aware we have prayer rooms in room 128 and 541 if they're needed. But please come enjoy and continue our really, really amazing conversation.